Hello there, I'm Gabriel, and this is How Being a Designer Changed the Way I Pay for Games. Questions are encouraged throughout the presentation, so whenever something comes to your mind, post it in the chat, and if I don't answer it right away, I'll certainly go back at the end and answer everything as long as there's time. So I'm here to share some insights that I've gained from the 18 years I've spent designing games. In that time, I've made around 20 games under the studio name of Bluish Green Productions. I've worked exclusively with friends and small teams, although there was one time where I had a chance to interview at a mobile game studio which developed free-to-play games. During the interview, I asked, "So, do you just hang up your conscience when you walk in the door?" Yeah, I did not get the job, but I got an answer, which I will share in a bit. I think from my question, you can guess how I feel about free-to-play games, but let's back up a bit. So, games are a form of art, and like all art, I think we can better appreciate them if we get to know a little bit more about how they're made. I don't want to turn everyone into a snobby connoisseur, but in my experience, understanding how art is made helps you appreciate it all the more. The art classes that I had in school did a pretty bad job of this. Thank you for the follow, Helm Systems. So, yeah, they forced me to memorize the names of painters, movements, paintings, all of which did next to nothing for my appreciation of art. At least it did expose me to a lot of art, and I got to see some fantastic illustrations, which I still find inspiring to this day. And my assignments got me creating works of art so I could firsthand get a feel for how difficult it was to illustrate something like that. The first game I ever played was a copy of Pokemon Blue with a broken battery that made it impossible to save my progress. Yes, yeah, those were the works of Escher. I love these. The House of Stairs, especially, huge inspiration to me. So, broken battery, Pokemon Blue. It was a kid. I was a kid, so it didn't matter, and I was so enamored with this franchise that I wanted to make my own Pokemon game. If there's any game developers in the chat, please feel free to share what game inspired you to start creating. I started to learn how to program using GameMaker by just using simplified drag and drop blocks of code. And it sank in pretty quickly that I wasn't going to be making my own Pokemon game anytime soon. But I stuck with it. And because, well, I should say, despite how difficult I found it to develop games, I had really found my passion in game design. So, what exactly does a game designer do? Well, on a day-to-day basis, I spend a lot of time developing systems. And we have a comment from Helm Systems saying that Sierra Adventure Games at first, but Baldur's Gate. Oh, yeah. The original one back in the late 90s really drove it in from my love for RPGs. Yeah, I hear that's a big inspiration to a lot of people. And we've got a comment from Terenam? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. My earliest memory, I think, is helping my dad play the original Elite. Yeah, I sat on his lap and got to press the M when he wanted me to fire a missile. I love it when parents can like bring their kids into a game experience like that. All right, so systems. Battle systems, economic systems, loot drop systems, and weaving them all together into one big system that is a working game. However, according to my favorite book on the subject, The Art of Game Design, a game designer communicates an experience. Now, this is paraphrased from the book. It's a really great one if anyone hasn't heard of it before. I highly recommend it to all designers. And I love this definition because it broadens the scope of what a game can be. Using experience in place of game gets to the heart of what you're creating. Everything in a game, the systems, the art, the music, the code, the story, should all be in service of the essential experience. In Mario, that essential experience is joy. Mario's bright, colorful, and the systems that govern your movement are tuned to be fluid and fun to control. You can have fun in a Mario game by just bouncing around in the hub world, never mind actually playing a level. In The World Ends With You, the essential experience is self-expression. The World Ends With You is an RPG with a high emphasis on customizing the equipment you use in battle. Everything from the colorful pins you equip to perform attacks to the fashion of the clothes that you wear that boost your stats. There's even a system in the game that allows you to be a fashion trendsetter. The clothes that you wear into battle become more popular, and as a result, you get a boost to your combat strength. And if anyone in the chat can identify the essential experience of your favorite game, please do share. I'd love to hear how people, if you get the idea of what the essential experience is. And I'm not even saying that like a game has like strictly that I've correctly identified the essential experiences in Mario or The World Ends With You, but these are just the way that I see them. And I think a large part of it is up to interpretation. Now, as for the role that communication plays in game design, well, some people might forget that communication is equal parts speaking and listening. It is the imparting or exchanging of information or news. And I say speaking, but it's really anything from speaking to writing to drawing pictures or even physically demonstrating something. And of course, you have to listen. You have to watch your audience, read their facial expressions, and engage with them to make sure they really understand what you're saying. So we get a comment from Tyrannum. I love the Talos principle. It's happy to be just a puzzle game, but it also wants to make you think about the nature of humanity if you engage with the Milton, the library AI. And Helm System comments, I love it when games make me feel the world is alive and I have a certain degree of freedom to do things, hence love for open world games. Absolutely. All right. So, of course, a game designer constructs systems in a game, which are meant to convey an essential experience. So then they have to explain these systems to the player, maybe through gameplay, maybe through a tutorial, or maybe through character dialogue. Then the game designer must observe the player trying the game to see whether or not these explanations were understood. Remember this game? Well, I kept making games that featured the character of Robo, and eventually I hired an artist to produce Robo's World: The Zarnok Fortress. I built the game into a Mega Man-style action platformer where you can fire a laser from Robo's visor, throw magnetic grenades, or whack enemies with a punch. When I playtested it, I watched in confusion as people completely ignored the laser and walked up to each enemy robot and awkwardly traded punches with it. I couldn't figure out why people kept risking the damage when they could easily defeat enemies using their laser with no risk of retaliation. I didn't want to rebuild the combat system in the game, so I tried to think of some ways to incentivize players in the right direction. The way I saw it, I could either buff the laser or debuff the punch. And let me know in chat if you can think of any other options I could have tried. Now, I was pretty sure that the laser was plenty powerful already, and guessed that players were just using the punch instead because it visually looked more powerful. So I decided to alter the game by adding a negative incentive. Enemies would now explode on death. And Tyrannum suggests making the laser look flashy. And yeah, certainly you can't see the character firing the laser right now, but it has like a double helix particle pattern flying out the back of it, adding more to the laser's visual appeal or detracting from the punch were both things that we experimented with. But ultimately, the artist didn't want to make the punch visually look worse. And I understand where he's coming from. So we found a different way to solve it. So now that the enemies exploded on death, I was hoping that if players knew that they would lose a big chunk of their health by punching an enemy to death, they would try to keep their distance from enemies, and it mostly worked. I could have probably saved myself a fair bit of work if I'd paid more attention to the incentives that cropped up in the combat system. But ultimately, when you have an idea in your head about how a game should be played, it can be difficult to predict all the ways it can go wrong because of how you handle player motivation. And one of the most important things to remember as a designer is that all systems are like a board covered in magnets, with invisible fields attracting and repelling. Every system has positive and negative incentives that motivate player behavior. Did you make a fighting game with all kinds of crazy combos and flashy moves? Well, get ready to have the player base pick it to the bone and find the one attack that has the lowest effort in to power out ratio and exploit the heck out of it. Did you make a card game with a new effect that combos with an existing card to make a playstyle that's so dominant that over half the players in the game start earning decks with that strategy? These are all examples of min-maxing, an easy behavior to fall into because our brains are biologically wired to look for the lowest effort, highest reward solution to a problem. Our brains use up a lot of energy trying to solve problems, so we take shortcuts whenever we can. we are naturally motivated to try and find the optimal solution to any given problem, or at least copy someone else's solution. And unfortunately, these solutions usually draw the player away from the essential experience. In fact, it's pretty common warning to newbie designers to watch out, because if you give players a chance, they will optimize all the fun out of a game. Let me know if you've ever cheesed a tough enemy encounter in a game by exploiting the AI or hitting it from a distance with projectiles. Sure, it's effective, but it's also incredibly tedious. And that's bad enough when it's just a single player experience, but what if your min-maxing ends up ruining the experience of players beside yourself? A lot of the classic board games that we play are a free-for-all, and sometimes the results can be ugly. I'm sure we can all think of times when we've had a bad time playing a game because someone was too focused on winning. Tyrannim comments, I'm much more likely to do that in some kind of permadeath mode because the stakes are very high. Yes, exactly. You end up, like if you're playing a Pokemon Nuzlocke, you end up just spending a ridiculous amount of time grinding because, what's the alternative? You don't want to get into a battle that you might lose. And yes, Monopoly, Helm Systems, Monopoly does always end up in arguments. I'm glad it's not just my family. So, on one particular occasion when I was playing Settlers of Catan, to briefly explain the rules for those not familiar, to win the game, you need 10 victory points, and one of the most basic ways to earn victory points is through constructing settlements by spending resources that you have collected over the course of the game. You can also redeem these resources for development cards, which have various effects, like stealing resources from other players. So, I was playing Catan with my little sister, my dad, and my stepmother. I was one victory point away from winning and just needed a single grain resource, which I knew my stepmother had. So I asked if she'd be willing to trade for it, and naturally she refused. Alexandra Haru, thank you for the follow. So of course she refused. Then I threw down the Monopoly card and took the grain, built the settlement, and won the game. I had the Monopoly card all along, and I could have just used it to win. There was no reason I needed to play it up by asking for a trade first, anticipating that she would say no, and then force her to give me the grain anyway. Since then, my family doesn't want to play Settlers of Catan with me anymore. No wonder. By being so focused on the short-term victory, I completely dashed my chances of ever playing future games. I should have tried to maximize my long-term happiness by making sure everyone had a good time, and opened up the possibility of getting to play more often. After all, relationships are more important than winning. So, to summarize what I've covered so far, games are made of systems. All systems have incentives, and incentives, both positive and negative, motivate player behavior. Now, our default approach to any system is to try to min-max it. So where am I going with all this? Well, this is the perspective that I look at games from. And when I look at the way that games are monetized, I see, well, putting it lightly, I see a conflict of interest between players and developers. Now, just talking about monetization models is something of a minefield because you have a lot of strong opinions being thrown around on both sides. But that's exactly why I want to talk about it, because I feel like there's a lot of shouting, maybe not much speaking, and little to no listening. So in the blue corner, we have the players who want to spend as little money as possible. Maybe it was because of the prevalence of software piracy. Maybe it's because Steam sales are encouraging us to wait until games are 90% off before buying. Maybe it's because the mobile app store got us used to the idea that software should cost $1 or less. Whatever the influencing factors, the amount the average consumer is willing to spend on an upfront purchase has been driven down significantly. In the red corner, we've got the game development studios. They may be making art, but these are still businesses that must sell products or services. They are mostly beholden to publishers trying to promise a substantial return on investment based on past successes to secure funds for each new project. Whether the studio gets funding from a publisher or scrounges together enough funds through some other means, after all the years of time and financial investment, the product has to succeed, or else the studio is at risk of closing down, and now everyone's out of a job. If we look at these cases side by side, I think the problem becomes pretty clear. As a player, I want to minimize my investment and maximize my entertainment that I stand to get out of any given purchase. On the other hand, a studio needs to figure out how it can minimize development costs while maximizing profit from sales. These objectives are diametrically opposed to one another, and so each game studio must find their own solution to this problem. And one that's been increasingly popular is the use of microtransactions. Just so we're all on the same page, let's start by defining a microtransaction really broadly as a payment used to purchase something ancillary to a product. This includes everything from DLC to loot boxes. And while I'll be making a lot of references to apps, please keep in mind that everything I discuss with regards to microtransactions applies to PC and console games too. And don't let the name micro fool you. It could mean spending anywhere between $1 to $2,500 for a virtual spaceship. Now, I wish we lived in a world where the microtransaction or in-app purchase worked like the game demo model. This was the case with Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. I downloaded it as a free app to try the first few chapters, and then the remaining chapters were delivered as in-app purchases. This was a great way to let me try the game, get interested in the story, and then pay to unlock the rest of the content. And this is one of the primary advantages of games which are free to play, or at least free to start. It's incredibly easy to get players in the door. Apps are especially painless to install. Once the game is downloaded to your phone, developers now need to focus on retention and conversion. According to the game studio where I interviewed, in a successful free-to-play game, the studio is hoping that roughly 2% of the player base will be converted to a paying customer by the end of a 7-day period. Of the total player base, they are also hoping that a fraction of a percent, maybe 1 in 1,000 players, will be converted into a so-called whale spender. And these whales spend ridiculous sums of money on the game, sometimes accounting for half the total revenue. That looks to me like a pretty big incentive that would motivate a studio to implement content that appeals primarily to the whales. Because if those players move on, the game shuts down. So, who are these whales that would pay triple, potentially quadruple digit figures on a mobile game when that money could be spent on anything else? If anyone has a guess, please drop it in the chat now. Because I certainly had the impression that the only people who would spend such irresponsible amounts of money on free-to-play games were kids running up their parents' credit card bills. And maybe in some cases, stories like those make a headline, but once the story goes public, Apple is very likely to reverse the charges. And I can't imagine that gives the studio the best chance of getting featured in the App Store, at least for a little while. No. As part of my interview with the mobile game studio, they told me that their most successful product, it's a mom game. They all grew up with this IP, and they're now parents without much time that want to recapture the feeling of joy they got from the IP as kids. This is why I asked the question, so do you just hang up your conscience when you walk in the door? And they responded, well, we're creating the experience that our players want, and we do our best to make sure players are making informed purchases. Okay, well, if it's an informed purchase we're after, then I think we need to go a little further in informing the public about the host of strategies employed by these studios to turn players into paying customers. Here's a list of tactics I'm going to discuss today, and as for as many as I'm going to cover, this isn't a complete list. So we'll start with in-game currencies. We're pretty used to seeing various currencies in the games we play. Most RPGs I've played have money to buy items and gear, and XP as a currency for leveling up. Plenty of modern games have introduced crafting components, which are their own kind of currency, one which the developer can more carefully control. And free-to-play games are absolutely plagued by an overabundance of currency types. Then, of course, there's the premium currency, the one purchasable with real money. Now, if I can pay $2 for a ticket, and then redeem that ticket to buy something in the game, then why do I need the intermediate currency? Well, it's partially because it lets the developers reward you with tickets without paying for them. And it's so they can offer bulk discounts to encourage you to buy tickets in greater quantities. But most importantly, it distances us from the value of our money. It's the same reason that casinos make you trade your money in for chips. They'll probably tell you that it's for security, to prevent fraud, and maybe even your own personal safety. But what they don't tell you is that $50 feels a lot less real when it's a brightly colored plastic chip. As an added bonus, if you pay upfront for a whole bunch of a game's premium currency, then the company gets all the value of your money right away, while you only get value from the in-game currency when/if you get around to spending it. So let me know in chat if you've ever gotten a gift card and then held onto it for months or years because you forgot you had it, or forgot to bring it to the store. Incidentally, this is why I don't get the sentiment that it's rude to give people cash as a gift, but gift cards are fine. If you really can't think of a better gift, just go ahead and give people cash instead of gift cards. Then the value stays in their hands instead of some corporations. So in-game currencies also let developers create a concept of artificial scarcity. When you start thinking that something is worth more than it really is, just because of how rare they seem to be or how hard they are to get a hold of, kind of like diamonds in real life. Now, a Skinner box is an experiment designed to study animal behavior, named after, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, Burgos Friedrich Skinner, the first person to perform the experiment. Helm System comments, excellent points, thank you. Most recent example that comes to mind on playing habits is the Helix credits in Assassin's Creed. And as for gift cards, indeed, many times I've almost forgotten one given. It doesn't feel as real as you say. Yes, indeed, that's kind of the point. So, Skinner box involved a pigeon in a box with a button rigged up to a lever, which is rigged to dispense food if the pigeon pecks the button. And when I first learned about the Skinner box, I thought it was very similar to Pavlov's work on conditioned response, but it is subtly different. Classical conditioned response works on the premise of push lever, get food. You form an association where doing one thing results in the other. Or if you always listen to classical music while you eat, then if you hear classical music, you'll feel like eating. But there's actually more going on here. The objective is not to teach the pigeon to use the button or to associate the pushing of the button with getting food. The objective is to get the pigeon to peck the button as often as possible. What Skinner discovered is referred to as operant conditioning, the practice of conditioning behavior based on active choices the participant is making. And of course, it works just as well on people as it does on pigeons. Now, with rewards, like food, this works until you reach a satiation point. You aren't hungry anymore, so you don't want any more of the reward. By contrast, if you give people a reward that has no satiation point, something that feels like you can never get enough of, like money, or hey, in-game currency, the operant conditioning can work indefinitely. And it's also important to note that Skinner found that if you reward the pigeon with food every time, the pigeon doesn't peck the button as often as it would if the rewards were distributed at random, or if the rewards were distributed at a fixed time interval. And these sound a lot to me like random drop items and login rewards. So let's keep these random rewards and fixed interval rewards in mind as we look at other monetization practices going forward. The gambler's fallacy is as useful to free-to-play game designers as it is to casino owners. Basically, it comes from a bad intuition about statistical outcomes. Our brains really like to spot patterns, even where there aren't any. So if I roll a 6-sided die, and it comes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what are the chances that I'm about to roll a 6? It doesn't matter what I rolled before. My chances of rolling any given number will always be exactly 1 in 6. And this is because you have to consider each roll independently and suppress your instinct to look at it as a series in which there's some kind of pattern. Sure, the last card pack I bought didn't have a legendary in it, but that just makes it much more likely that the next one will. Back when I was learning how to program, I made a lottery simulator and plugged in the actual chances of winning the lottery from the most popular lotteries where I grew up winning. Here in the city. When I ran the simulation, I saw that if you were to buy a lottery ticket once a week, by the time you finally win the lottery, you will have spent more than you stand to win, and you'll be roughly 100,000 years old. which, hey, is only 20 times longer than the length of recorded human history. But with each ticket that people buy, with each pull of a slot machine's lever, they are becoming more and more financially invested in the possibility of a positive outcome. We are all the protagonists of our own stories. Our egos tell us that while others may fail, we are the ones who will win big. Really, the only winning move is not to play in the first place. Every game you play at a casino always has less than 50% odds of winning. Its wide roulette has that one green space. Otherwise, the chances of getting red or black would be equal to 50. The longer you play, the more of your money inevitably goes to the casino. So, if we naturally get this false sense that investing in a lottery boosts our chances of succeeding the next time around, then wouldn't it be so much worse if that were actually true? And yet, this is what I've seen game designers do. Oh, the first time you redeem a ticket for a chance at getting the character you want, you'll only have a 3% chance of getting them, but the next time you'll have a 3.1% chance, and so on. The designers are reinforcing the gambler's fallacy. You only lose when you back out and give up. Oh, just keep spending money. You'll get what you want. Here we are, the much maligned loot box. They come in many forms, whether it's a box, a card pack, a gashapon, a blind box. These all present a package whose contents are determined through probability. They prevent a consumer from directly buying what they want. You just need to keep spending money and hope luck is on your side. The random nature of loot boxes makes it really easy to create artificial scarcity. Think of how easy it would be for developers to look at live metrics to determine which cosmetic items are the most popular and artificially decrease how often those appear. Sure, you're guaranteed to get one rare or better in each box, but as to which rare item you get, those might not be completely random. But players are clever. They'll gather up all the data from each drop they get and eventually notice the decreased drop rate. So maybe you hide it. Deflate the drop rate for non-paying players, and compensate by making it that much more likely for paying players to get. It's really easy to imagine all kinds of awful ideas like this. And what if the items aren't cosmetic? What if they directly influence your chances of winning, like they do in a competitive card game? Yes, we get a comment from Pug Boss. Yeah, true loot box, 1% rare skins. Yeah, 1% or even lower if they're legendary or whatever. So, if a designer creates a really powerful card, they can make it really rare, again, forcing players to buy more card packs if they want to stay competitive. And no, the fact that you can toil away in a Skinner box system to grind enough currency through completing quests to earn it instead of paying for it does not make it okay. These are fixed interval rewards, known as energy systems, and they're next on the hit list. So, broadly speaking, an energy system consumes a finite resource needed to progress in a game that takes real-world time to replenish. At first, it seems weird to me that a game would want to lock you out and prevent you from playing, but this could be for a couple reasons. One, they're trying to pad out limited content. Or two, they're trying to turn play of the game into a habit. Playing a game once, binging all the content, does not make it into a habit. When you do something on an hourly or daily basis, it becomes a part of your routine. It becomes a habit. These games aren't trying to create genuinely engaging experiences that you want to play. All they care about is making the game compelling to the point where you have to play. And the reason this works is because energy systems are an example of delayed gratification. If you know in the back of your mind that there will be rewards waiting for you after a fixed period of minutes or hours, you'll want to log in again to claim those rewards. Even worse, if those rewards are ripe for the picking, you'll have this feeling that the longer you go without redeeming the rewards, the more future rewards you're missing out on because you haven't claimed one batch to start the next one going. And we are creatures of habit. It isn't fun to slavishly follow a routine like this, but it is optimal. And you get hung up feeling like that any time you didn't log back in to claim a reward would be wasted. And this happened to me when I was playing Plants vs. Zombies and tried out its Zen Garden mode. It was the single most stressful thing I'd ever experienced playing a game. These plants would spit out tiny sums of currency, which you could collect yourself, or you could buy a snail to pick them up for you. But of course, the snail is slow. It falls asleep after just 3 minutes, so it wouldn't pick up very much money, unless you fed it chocolate. But the chocolate only lasts for 60 real-world minutes before you need to feed him more. So there I was, sitting in the middle of my grade 12 class with a nervous twitch because the timer was up and I couldn't wait to feed a virtual snail chocolate. And once that thought occurred to me, and I heard how stupid it sounded, I gave up on it, because the things I own shall not own me. If anyone feels comfortable with sharing a similar story they might have, please do post them in chat. Now, some game companies have even monetized their energy systems by capitalizing on the impatience of users and allowing players to pay in-game currency to accelerate them. I thought this would disrupt the timing pattern that was supposed to reinforce the user's habit of playing the game, and people would realize they're being taken advantage of. But these pay-to-accelerate systems are still present in top-grossing apps to this day, so these designers must have a better understanding of human psychology than I do. Better or worse, you decide. Login rewards are a type of energy system designed to get you to at least launch the game once a day, even if you don't end up actually playing it. Where most games simply hand over a small amount of premium currency on a daily basis, games like Hearthstone were among the first I saw to make you work for it. Each day they give you a quest, which is an opportunity to earn currency. Then you get to log in just to see what new quest you get for the day, and then they make you play the game and actually to get the reward. A great example of delayed gratification. Since then, far more mobile games have combined giveaway-style login rewards with quest-style login rewards. Has anyone in chat installed a game on their phone, and after a while you stopped playing it, but you kept it installed just to keep collecting the login rewards? If you have and you want to share, please post it in the chat. Login rewards aren't a new idea. They operate on the same principle that makes store loyalty cards effective. It's worth it to a retailer to offer you discounts on their goods if it means you'll keep doing business with them to the exclusion of everyone else. And so it is with games. Maybe you weren't converted to a paying customer after the end of a week. Maybe they'll get you in a month or in a year. To the designer, as long as they can keep you in the game's ecosystem, there's still a chance they can extract value from you. For all the games out there that offer massive whale purchases in the form of $100 games with in-game currency purchases, there is one genre that is likely to nickel and dime its player base to death. I'm talking about Match 3 games. They've managed to make as much, if not more money, by offering one-off purchases of only $1 at a time. And they're doing it by using one of the most powerful tactics lotteries and casinos have to offer, the near miss. So you throw a ball towards a hoop, it bounces off the rim. You missed, but you were pretty close, right? With practice, you could line up your shot, sink the next throw, if not every time, then at least a majority of the times. This line of thinking is how we learn from our failures and improve, but unfortunately can be used against us. You pull the lever on a slot machine, and it comes up 7. Cherry. Darn, I was so close. Not at all. The result was predetermined to fail the moment you pull the lever, but it threw up 2 out of 3 matching symbols to trick you into thinking it was close. The moment you see 2 out of 3 matching symbols, your heart begins to race as you get a rush of dopamine in anticipation of a positive outcome. Pub Boss comments, we are at a carnival game stage of monetization with near miss. Absolutely. And Tyrannum comments, Rocket League is awful at this. The common item you get is sandwiched between 2 rare items. Yeah. So the same approach even works with lottery scratch cards. Ever wonder why you have to play these elaborate games of bingo or word searches? It's to set up scenarios where it looks like you are so close to getting a complete set, but end up being 1 short. Even though the results are printed onto the cards in advance, without any moving parts of a slot machine to trick you into thinking the result is being calculated in real time, it still triggers the near-miss impulse. I hate these lottery scratch cards, and my family gets them for me like every Christmas and I refuse to play them. I just scratch the code and check them with the scanner, because you don't want to get caught up in that feeling of being taken advantage of by the game. So in the case of match 3 games, the order of the pieces as they fall from the top of the screen probably seems random, but it would be the easiest thing in the world to control the drops to make it look random. In the way that our natural ability to find patterns works against our understanding of statistics, it also works against our intuition for understanding what is truly random. And this makes it surprisingly easy to fake randomness. The match 3 designers could give the player the pieces they need to get 95% of the required score they need to complete a level easily, then throw on the brakes and have them fail artificially. Oh man, you were so close. How about just paying one measly little dollar to give you 5 more moves so you can clear this level? Oops, did the player only get 80% of the score they needed to clear the level, and victory is more than 5 moves away? No problem. Just trigger a whole bunch of conveniently lucky bonuses to get them almost the rest of the way there. To summarize, there is a clash between a player's desire to pay as little as possible with the studio's desire to maximize profit. And that clash creates an incentive that motivates developers to implement increasingly deceptive models, monetization models that make harmful applications of psychological research. Old school arcade games weren't made to be difficult because that's what the designers thought was the most fun. These games were artificially difficult to try and wring the most quarters out of their audience. In fact, some arcade cabinets are built to this day with switches or dials the owners can use to inflate the difficulty even further. Pub Boss comments with an explanation. It reminds me of more predatory arcade machines back when it was a thing. Crazy difficulty walls that were meant to eat quarters. Well, yeah, there you go. That's exactly the example that I was bringing up. Honestly, I used to play a game called Block Stacker at an arcade that I went to, where there's this little block that's going back and forth. You got to hit the button at the right time to get it to stack on top of the existing ones. And if you got it up to a certain height, you would win a prize. That is presented as a game of skill, but it's entirely probability. Like it still involves skill to get the block built all the way up to the top. But when you're on the very last step and you're about to win some $50 or $100 prize, which I'd gotten up to before, that even if you hit the button at the exact right time, the game will just say, no, you failed. And that's why these people can put in like $100, back in the day, it was like an iPod that you could win or a Nintendo DS. It's like, oh my God, I could win this game of skill and then I could get this really expensive thing. No, it's completely determined by probability. And I think it's a complete scam that these things are allowed to operate or exist anywhere. And again, if you see these things in the wild, you see people playing them, tell them like, this is not fair. Anyway, so modern games with microtransactions are heading down a similar path. We're seeing games designed to coerce players into paying for a quote-unquote free experience. Games which are compelling instead of engaging. And I'm not saying that every game needs to be an indie auteur think piece, and I'll admit I don't have a solution to this problem. But my objective today was to highlight the inherent conflict of motives where this problem stems from, and to draw attention to the flaws in modern monetization practices so you can better defend yourself as consumers. And hopefully with a more clear definition of the problem, we can start to have a conversation about how to solve it. If anyone in chat would like to contribute to this conversation, please share your thoughts. And I really hope we can find a solution, because games are such an important part of my life. Since I was a kid, they've brought me unforgettable experiences. From the joy of Mario, the exploration of Zelda, and the story of The World Ends With You, I have to ask, what does the childhood of the next generation look like? The way the games that I played were an inspiration to me, and the games that I make today, do we want the next generation of game developers making games based off of Candy Crush and Farmville? So let's start communicating. Let's speak and let's listen. Let's shift our goal to maximize everyone's happiness over the long term instead of exclusively our own over the short term. And let's not spend so much as 1 cent of our hard-earned money on deceitful microtransactions. And if you know someone who is playing these kinds of games, speak up and talk to them about what you learned today. This presentation will be available on YouTube, so if you think I did a good job of explaining these things, then maybe you could share it with them. Breaking someone out of a habit can be a slow and uncomfortable process, one which they might even push back on you for trying to instigate. But these people are stuck in these habits and they don't realize the harmful situation they're in. They need your help. As a player and as a human being, I ask that you value your time. So please play the games that respect your time. Thank you. So if anyone has any questions or anything that you want to talk about what we've covered today, maybe something I didn't cover, please feel free to post your question in chat. And if you want to try some of the games I made or hear more about what I have to say on game design, you can check out my website, bluescreenproductions.com, where I've hosted the Gameology podcast. And you can also get in touch with me on Twitter or on my Discord. And I do see we have a couple comments in chat. So Tyranum comments, at this point, I think regulation is inevitable. Belgium and the Netherlands have already started. Politicians in the US and UK are talking similar terms. Yep. Helm System comments, very good question. I grew up knowing that you buy a game and then all the rewards and satisfaction were part of the game. At the worst case, you would need to spend a little bit of extra to get an expansion to the game, and that was it. To be honest, I could never get into the whole loot box or even the MMO subscriptions. Same holds of free-to-play games. Yeah, and I think that the point that Tyranum brings up with the question of regulation, the reason that this becomes such a difficult problem to solve is because you have the idea that systems in games can be used for multiple things. Like in the way that random drops are a common thing that we see in RPGs. So do you say that enemies aren't allowed to have random drops anymore? Or if you do, and you say like, okay, a developer or a player has to have the right to purchase directly what they want. You can't tie it to a probability. Well, there are all kinds of like awfully creative things that a developer could do to try and circumvent that. Like swinging the banhammer around doesn't solve this problem. And I wish it did, but it just gets incredibly complicated. There's always some way that people can like weasel out of regulation. Indie World Order comments, thank you. Question, do you think MMO games making grinding systems for mounts, armor, etc. to keep butts in seats for monthly subscriptions are as bad as straight up loot boxes? On that random drop question, when is it too much? Okay, interesting. So let's unpack this one at a time. Yes, absolutely. The MMOs are obviously built to be games that last for an incredibly long period of time. They get into the energy system thing that I mentioned, where it's being used to pad out content. This is where you'll get fetch quests. The developers, the designers have a complete control over the game economy and the world economy to try to inflate how long something is going to take. So there's no question that they are creating these grinding systems to necessitate the idea that you'd have to save up a whole bunch of currency in order to be able to afford a thing. That's kind of part and parcel with the MMO experience, and I don't actually have experience playing MMOs. The only one I ever got into was RuneScape, way back in the day. And I got super into it, and I ended up spending so much time on it that I never ended up playing any other MMO again. I was like, there's no way that I can just sink this much of my time or my life into a game. So that's why I didn't talk about subscription models. Although in general, I am against them. This is why when it was possible, I bought Adobe Creative Suite CS6. It was freaking expensive, but at least I still own and can use that software to this day instead of having to pay for a subscription service to Creative Cloud. As for the second part of the question, the random drops, when is it too much? I think this is very much one of those you'll know it when you see it kind of things. If you start to crunch the numbers and realize that there's just an abyssal chance of ever getting what you want out of something, you know that there's probably some shenanigans afoot. Tyranum comments, I don't expect loot boxes to be regulated out of existence, but if they're classified as gambling, then they can't be marketed to kids, and they will, in theory, have to be fair in a sense, not artificially skewing odds. Now, as I pointed out, unfortunately, marketing to kids isn't the problem. You know, we have people, rational adults, playing these games and falling victim to loot boxes and these kind of tactics, even though they are well past the age of majority. You know, they're considered adults legally, therefore anything goes. I definitely think it's good if kids aren't exposed to gambling style practices. As I hopefully made clear in the presentation, I think it's terrible that some game design practices actually reinforce the gambler's fallacy. And just in general, like, so many games will play with statistical probability. Like, if something says on the tin that it's a 90% chance to hit and then it misses, that feels awful. So in games like Fire Emblem, if something says 90% chance to hit, in the background, it's actually 99% chance to hit. And it works the other way. If something is like it says 50% chance to hit, it is actually lower. It's all to give, to sort of line up with our human bad understanding of statistics. So yeah, again, it's a very complicated problem. And yeah, gambling, like, the fact that a lot of the same problems that come up with monetization models come up with whether or not you think that gambling should be regulated. Is it an individual's right to choose these things, that whether or not they participate in them? Is it healthy? Should it be allowed? Is it a government's role to step in and say, this is not allowed, this is? Just because something exists and it's something that people want, does that mean that we should be allowing people to expose themselves to harmful things? And that's just a question of personal morals. Like, the way that our political system works, if 51% of people believe one thing, then that's the system we go with. So if more people believe that you shouldn't allow people to be exposed to harmful things than those who say that it's everyone individual's right to choose, then we're going to end up picking one thing or another. But this whole conversation gets political really quickly, and when people feel like their personal freedoms are at stake, then they really clench up and start shouting and stop listening. So again, complicated. Helm System comments, question, what in your opinion would be a solution from a consumer's perspective? What in your opinion would perhaps be better equip or educate the consumer and guard them against such practices? It's what I'm doing right now. It's why I gave this presentation. I feel like the best thing that you can do, short of getting into the questions of regulation, which everyone feels not good about for good reason, if you don't believe in governmental control over things, but education, just telling people about these things, about these practices, getting people familiar with the terminology of the near miss and the gambler's fallacy and how bad we are at statistics in general. The more that you can spread the word about these things, the more that the consumer can be informed. In the same way that we have a right to know when we're being advertised to, we should have a right to know when these studios are using these practices. And if they're not going to tell us, then we just need to be better educated as consumers so we can spot it for ourselves. I think that's kind of the easiest and fastest solution, even if it's not perhaps the ultimate solution, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's heavy stuff, right? And this presentation was originally going to be quite different. I hope that someday I'll get to give the more lighthearted version of it again. As I mentioned, I gave it at EGLX, and it was sort of like half this presentation, but I ended up rewriting the first half of the presentation to bring the first half in line with the second half. And yes, Helm Systems, you are most welcome. Yeah, heavy stuff is interesting. Again, it's why I had to bring the presentation in this direction, because as I was writing it, that's the direction it sort of naturally felt like it wanted to go. And as a designer, as someone who sees these things myself, it's like I just got to get the word out. It doesn't feel good to be sitting on this kind of information and not doing my best to share it with people. So thank you, Indie Game Lover, for saying it's a great presentation. I appreciate your feedback. We still got a little bit more time if anyone else has any questions or comments they want to share. Another comment from Helm Systems. I appreciate your passion and determination to discuss these topics. Yeah, as I said, it is a minefield, because game developers quite rightly feel like they work on these products for a really long time. They get very heavily invested in them. They're people working jobs just like everyone. They're trying to make a living, and people have to support them somehow. I love the Patreon model, but that's just not going to work for large scale game development studios. And then by contrast, we've got the players who just want to say like, I just there's the whole feeling of like, oh, it should be $1 per hour of gameplay. It's like, do you really want that? Do you really want developers to stretch out their game and add in a whole bunch of padding so that if you pay $60, you get a 60-hour experience? Or would you just feel better about like, paying for a quality experience? And it's an individual choice. Some people feel one way, some people feel another, and if even just talking about it, both sides feel like you're attacking them, which is again why it feels so hard to bring it up. So I hope I have done a diplomatic job at discussing these things today. And thank you, Skull Commando Labs and Pug Boss, for the follows. Do appreciate it. Yeah, we got about 5 more minutes to go, so any other questions or comments? If there's anything that anyone else wants to say or participate in the conversation. Oh, Tyrannum, thank you for the follow. Yeah, you can check out my Discord server. There is a link on my Twitch page, an invite that you can join up and participate in this conversation. It's pretty quiet on there right now. I don't have many people on the Discord, but hopefully we'll get some conversations going soon. And thank you, Indie Game Lover, for the follow. You know what? I guess that feels like about a good of a time to start wrapping things up as any. As I said, I've been Gabriel, and thank you so much to everyone here for participating in this conversation and just, sitting through an hour of me talking about this sort of stuff. Of course, I'd like to give a big thanks to Indie World Order Con for giving me the opportunity to give this presentation and for bringing an audience here to me. So yeah, thanks everybody so much for participating, and I hope to see you in future conversations. Yeah, so everybody stay well, stay safe, and yeah, hopefully we'll find a solution. We'll crack this nut together. All right, bye-bye everyone.